found that from the fact that we just didn't waste any space, right? So that was one of the big deal. This is fiberglass.
At the end.
Yeah, we're starting at the end. We'll work our way back to the start. This is fiberglass bass. This is DVX, which is multi-species. Then we'll have aluminum bass and then aluminum multi-species on the far side, okay?
So you used to paint all your glass boats.
Still
right?
do
And
some of them, yep.
And now you do.
We do polyflake and a hard case paint option. So what we're doing essentially on the paint side is we gel coat the entire boat, and then we scuff everything that's going to get paint that over the top of it, then roll it down. The polyflake we're blowing, in the mold like we used to.
Okay.
So the biggest difference essentially is a fiberglass boat, you have to have a mold, okay? And there's, I guess I would say, restrictions on how many boats you can build a week out of that mold. And you have to have a lamination scheduled to make the flow to go right, okay? On the manufacturing side with aluminum, our boats essentially start on a 6-ton roll of 50-52 aluminum, 125,000. And what you'll see up here on the wall are different models, okay? So one of the really cool parts about aluminum is if we want to build 5 20-footers on Tuesday, we can build 5 20-footers. You want to build 3 18-footers the next day, we can build 3. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. We're putting in the longitudinal stringers on the inside of this, okay? And so it's one thing that's very unique about our boats is the majority of the aluminum business, the fuel tank's in the very back of the boat. We put it midship so that weight's underneath your rear end essentially, so it's a much smoother ride, okay? We put 3 knee braces across the 189, but on our bigger boats we go 5 knee braces. We'll weld plates on the outside of that and we'll shoot that with foam. Now every station you're going to see some of these little small holes drilled into our aluminum. That's where we're going to foam fill this aluminum boat. Foam does 3 things for an aluminum boat. It makes it quieter, it makes it more stable, and it makes it ride better, okay? Which are 3 things that are very important characteristics to a good aluminum boat. So we're very focused on that, but we'll weld in all the longitudinal stringers right here. We'll drop it in the tank, make sure we don't have any burn-throughs or anything like that. Install the keel extrusion, and we'll kind of go from there. Downdraft ventilation, which inevitably particles are going to get up, and if you have an updraft, you're going to pull those particles against whatever you're painting. So we suck it from the floor to make sure all the footers, there's quite a bit of force going on up there. You'll also notice every place that we run a screw on this boat, there's screw retention material to make sure that that doesn't back out and everything stays nice and solid. So this boat has just been infused. That resin's saturating through all that fiberglass, and then in a few hours we'll pull this cellophane bag off, pull it out of the mold, and marry it up to the hole essentially. So a lot of science that goes into this, but it's something that we feel like is important in the overall performance of the product, and it's also a leaner, meaner, and greener way of manufacturing these boats. Build, we've got like 109 different pieces of tooling, whether that's consoles, storage boxes, coolers, transoms, so on and so forth. Can we watch you infuse, please? What is this?
This is a 190.
This is the bait well for an ADX 190. It goes in front of the console. And what we've done here is we've laid in dry fiberglass underneath this bag. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull a vacuum on that. And what now she's going to do is for each piece of tooling, there's a stroke count essentially that we want to achieve to infuse this resin. So that's what she'll be doing right now. That's the resin. Yeah, that's the resin. So then now what we'll do, we'll pinch that off because we've got just the right amount, and that vacuum will continue to pull that resin, and we know just the right amount to stop on the edge here, that when we pull that out, we got a storage box.
How many times can you reuse that bag?
We go through a bag every 6 months. How long does a bag last?
It depends on how good the bag is actually made.
Yeah.
I've had some that I'm still using to this day that are the originals.
Yeah.
And some like once a year.
Once a year, probably. Fair? Yeah.
So are the 1980s rated for a 150?
They are, yes, sir.
What about a 200?
That'd be a 2080. So 2080 is 20 feet, 2 inches, 9 piece of aluminum, okay? And if you look at the back there, you'll see the layers that go over on the back of the transom. So that transom, there's actually, I think it's 14 pieces of fiberglass that are laid in there. And then there's also aluminum plates built in there because on Vexus boats, with the shallow water anchors actually attached, okay, instead of the jack plate. So we try to hit a, I would say 9-week order delivery to delivery standpoint. That swells to 11 weeks probably in the peak season, but you know, for us, those are the initiatives that we try to meet. It could be a little bit longer just on the West Coast, depending on, because you know we got to have four on a load to get out there. But yeah, that's generally what we work on.
What's the difference between the VXS and the VX?
So VX would be the first model of boat that we came on. For the VXS 21, essentially, there's really 3 differences. The hull is exactly the same, okay? On the VXS, the hull stripe comes up. It's shrank 2.5 inches on the deck, so you're sitting a little closer to the water. Then the other difference would be there's the trash compartment right here. Fuel, yeah, that kicks out right there. There's a day box on both the 20 and the 21 now. And on the VX20 to start off with, we didn't have a compartment over there for a day box. And it's mostly just interior. There's upholstery changes, console change, so on and so forth. But this is the deck right here. This grinding booth that you'll see behind us, we'll cut out the openings here. So this will be your port side, center, starboard rod boxes, and then obviously day box. They'll cut the floor out because that's where we'll put the fuel tank in the center. That's something that's really important on our fiberglass boats is we have a longitudinal fuel tank that essentially keeps the fuel on the center line, makes it more agile, makes it ride better, so on and so forth. But it also allows us to not have a fuel tank right here, so that's where the airwave pedestals come in that we've got that are, you know, air rides, which are extremely nice.
Super nice.
So every one of our boats essentially goes through a QC checkpoint right here when we wet sand and buff everything to make sure we get everything exactly the way that it needs to look. A lot of time spent right here, then we'll obviously transition into finish. It's probably not worth showing on a video, but I think we've all had bass boats with that shoebox fit that I was telling you about earlier with those molds. If you run your finger around the bottom side of this, sometimes you can stick your pinky up underneath it in one area and can't get your fingernail in the other. It's a uniform fit all the way around on this boat.
Are they glassed together or screwed together?
They are Uraflex and screwed. We finished this rear battery box out right here. We just want it to look nice and neat. And then you can see all the foam around all the rod boxes on the whole side right here, so on and so forth.
Feeding what we call our final assembly area. And I don't want to minimize what you saw already because it's complex and there's a lot taking place, but the fact is a lot of that's very consistent. You know, other than the specific color of the boat, it gets built the same way, or the fabrication, it gets done the same way. When you come into this quadrant of the building, it becomes your boat at that point. And so one of the things we've really worked hard on is our flexibility and choice, whether that be engines, trolling motors, depth finders. If you can dream it up and it's reasonable, we're going to try. And in many cases are able to do that. But it takes a lot of coordination. And part of that coordination is done through our computer system, our ERP. So when Mark's order goes in, that order goes into our ERP system and it tells our purchasing team what we need to buy for that boat. And then in turn, when we start the boat, it's communicating to our company throughout its process. We're able to follow that boat from the gel coat to here all the way through. Once it gets to this QC area and is about to spit itself out into the final assembly, what happens then is the computer tells the warehouse, we need all the stuff for it. We need every little thing that you could possibly imagine. And so we pull that and position them on these carts. You see him pulling a tub out. That cart, or carts, depending on the boat, is unique to that specific boat. And so the idea is to control inventory, but more importantly, to control accuracy. So in the case of, let's just use electronics, you don't want to put a Humminbird MSI transducer in at the stern and get to the console and realize that's a Garmin. And so that's prevented from happening by the case that he doesn't have a Humminbird transducer. The computer said, no, you need this GT36, and that's what's pulled out there. And so on the fiberglass side, you see two different production lines. One is not wholly dedicated, but for the most part, our bass boat, our VXS series. The second one is the DVX multi-species, but all of these installers are cross-trained. So depending on demand or how the flow of products coming, they're able to go back and forth, and the boat will spend roughly 3 days of its life here finishing. So in the world of building a home, for example, we're to the point where we're drywalling and we're doing finished electricity and cabinets are going in. So we're back there, it's more about framing and footings and so forth. That I come from an age where we used to run 2 fuel tanks because you couldn't track your fuel flow. And so you would run one empty and go, now I'm going to run to the other side because I know I can get home. Well, today with the fuel flow that's in the NEMA technology in these engines, you can figure it down to the 1/10 of a gallon. So it's made it a lot better for these long runs to know what you could and couldn't do. But maybe more importantly than that is the location of the fuel tank. By dropping it down in the keel, it's ballast, so that 55 gallons of fuel at roughly 6.5 pounds to the gallon, all that weight is down in the keel, which helps that boat stay stable, as opposed to washing side to side like it would in our prior versions. Well, here's a good example of the cooler. So here's the cooler that's already been pre-assembled for this boat, and it will be affixed down to the fuel hatch. Has a Deutsch plug for the LED lights that run around the tow rail of it. But just a real state-of-the-art, as good as you can buy cooler. Completely insulated, including the lid. You're culling your fish and you just drop the lid and you always know where your Bubba scale is.
Tell me about the air ride seats.
Yeah, so the air ride seats, in my opinion, are long overdue. The reason we're able to utilize them is because of our fuel location, by having it down in the keel, as opposed to sitting on the fuel, which is what you do in a lot of the other bass boats. Because we have this real estate, this airwave system is fairly simple. It has an air bladder that's set to a certain PSI, and that PSI is relative to your overall body weight. You can adjust that with a simple bicycle pump. But if it was just the bladder, you would dribble or bounce like a basketball. That's not what you obviously want. So there's an accumulator. I call it a strut. It serves the same purpose as a strut, that has a few more pounds of pressure than the bladder does. So as you fall down into the seat, that air accumulates into that strut to keep it from bouncing. And what I personally have believed that this air ride system does is it takes the jar out of it. Okay, where you had it before, where you've landed and you just cringe. That goes away by having these airwave seats, especially if they're set correctly. The other thing it does is when you're running the top of what I would call a chop, a heavy chop, not quite swells. And with these boats, especially this VXS 21, you can stand up on top of them or sit up and run on top and run at a faster speed and tolerate it, because the seat's taking that. Think of a washboarded dirt road, that the faster you go, the smoother it gets. It's that same principle. But yeah, they're expensive, and it's because they're worth it. They really are. The two halves of the hull are mirror images of each other, and the strakes, the running strakes, are 100% parallel. There's no variance in there, no human variance. And so when you curl this boat over, as you do to go into a turn, these other strakes then become the keel. This keel's out of the water. You see pictures of that. It's not providing any turn keel for you. Think of a surfboard. You know, if you do any wake surfing, that's why they're out there, they're doing the same thing. So with this, when you lay them over, the boat wants to stay hooked. And when those that don't, what you will experience or probably have is they want to break loose. And they start doing that. And that's because there's an imperfection in there somewhere. That imperfection is that water. You have to think like the water is doing, and if it finds that imperfection, it turns the boat loose. It turns it loose, and so you see these guys go around the corner and they're just walking all over the place. That's why. The Mod V style 18-foot 75 horsepower aluminums, we wanted to measure up and exceed what you'd see with anybody else.
Can you get the dual dash?
You can't on the Defenders. You can on all of the AVXs. And this is our most popular, the 1980.
And it's rated for a 200?
150. The 2080 takes you to a 200.
What's that difference in 4 inches back here? Everything's the same.